What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. I am very excited about today's episode because in today's episode, I'm going to show you how to contain volunteers. Now, if you've been gardening for any length of time, you probably know what a volunteer is. And if you're new to gardening and you don't know what a volunteer is a plant that grows that you didn't actually plant, but it grew voluntarily. Now, it could be from a seed that a bird drops. It could be, something that blew into your yard, or more than likely, it could be something that you grew in a previous year or earlier in the season that went to seed, dropped its seed. You didn't plant the seed, but the seed still grew. So those can also be volunteers. You can also get volunteers through things like compost. If you compost your food scraps, you might compost a cucumber or a melon or a tomato, and you get those sprouts from your compost. There's lots of different ways to get volunteers. But one of the most common ways that we get volunteers is through a seed that is spread for a plant that we grew previously. So like earlier in the growing season, we grew dill here, and it went to seed, and then it dropped its seed, and now we have a bunch of dill. But the one issue that a lot of people have with volunteers, and this is just a personal issue, doesn't have to, definitely not everyone is going to agree with this, but my issue with volunteers is that they kind of spread indiscriminately. And that can be an issue if you like to keep things orderly, or you have a plan for each bed, or you have walkways like we have where things can grow, and I don't want things just growing everywhere. We saw this with our volunteer squash, that while it was fun, I couldn't walk through my beds because they were growing right in the walkways, and squash take up a lot of space. It might also be something that competes, and you might have an issue with like a tomato seedling, like I'll show you, growing in your onion bed. We battled tomato seeds, we battled tomato volunteers that sprouted from seed in our onion bed all year long. It drove me crazy because we have onions growing there, and onions just cannot compete with a tomato. And we ended up having some onions that suffered because they were just constantly getting outcompeted by tomato seedlings. Now you might think to yourself, well, Luke, it sounds like volunteers are just all bad. They sprout where you don't want them. They take over beds that you have other stuff growing. They sound a lot like a weed, and they can be. They absolutely can be. But there is a silver lining to volunteers, and that's that I love volunteers. I'm on the record as saying that volunteers are one of the best things for a garden for several reasons. The first one is that volunteers are free. They don't cost you anything. So free is always great. The second thing is that volunteers are usually hardier and better acclimated to your current growing conditions. You see this dill back here? Well, we grew that dill this spring. And if we bought a packet of dill and planted the dill seed, we would have a plant that has never grown in this area before. So it has to actually take some time to get acclimated to its current growing conditions. It might be the soil, it might be how much water it gets, how hot the summers get, how cold the nights get. There's a lot of different growing conditions that plants have to get used to. And once it actually gets acclimated to those conditions, it can better predict how to grow and kind of adapt to those conditions, and then it does better, it's hardier. And so the second, third, fourth, so on crops from then are healthier, stronger, and more robust. They usually produce better, and they're more disease-free and pest-resistant. So they're great for that, and I love that because that makes it easier for you. But like I said, with all those things considered, they can still be a pest and a nuisance in the garden. Take dill, for example, or even the tomatoes that I'm going to show you. Volunteers can get out of control. But I've come up with a very, very simple way to keep your volunteers contained. This is going to allow you to maximize your crops, still while utilizing all of the benefits and really none of the downsides that come from volunteers. Now, this is going to apply to what you consider annuals that fruit and flower the same year. If you have annuals that fruit and flower the same year and will go to seed, and then the seeds will grow, like dill or lettuce, spinach, arugula, things like that, this works really well for. This does not work really well for things like tomatoes. Now, it can work, but it doesn't work really well. And that's because tomatoes, they give their fruit and flowers the first year, and then they grow the following year. So they're not really going to do very well. If you apply this method to tomatoes, it really won't work as well. So just keep that in mind, that we're looking for fast-growing annuals that fruit, flower, and then regrow that same year. All right, let's go. All right, so as you can see, these are tomato seedlings, and I think everyone has experienced this, whether it's come from compost or just tomatoes that drop on the ground at the end of the season. We grow a lot of tomatoes, and that's typically what happens, is the tomatoes fall on the ground, or you step on one and the seeds go splishing everywhere, and then you're left with seedlings. Lots of seedlings. Lots and lots of seedlings. This was my onion bed, and my onions could hardly compete against how many tomato seedlings kept popping up. I mean, no matter what, we could weed them and they'd keep coming back. There were so many tomato seeds in this bed because we had so many tomatoes growing in here last year, and after a couple strong winds, we had a lot of tomatoes that were ripe that fell on the ground, and that's all it took. That's really all it took to have a complete takeover of our bed. Now, these are fruiting, they're flowering, but you know, it's the idea that, you know, we were trying to grow onions here, and we really had a hard time growing onions here because of how many tomatoes were sprouting. Things like arugula. I absolutely love this dragon's tongue arugula. It's wonderful, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure how wonderful it is growing in the walkways. Again, it is wonderful, but it's everywhere in the walkways. Now, it's not ideal for me because I like to have my walkways be walkways. I like to have my plants be in my raised bed. But the mistake that I made was that I let the arugula go to seed because I really like food for the pollinators. And the pollinators, like honeybees, love the arugula flowers. So I let the arugula go to seed, and it dropped its seed all over the place. And lastly is borage. Now, borage is the most egregious offender of this. It's wonderful for pollinators, which is why I really like to grow borage. The honeybees and bumblebees love it. They absolutely cannot get enough of borage. But what I can get enough of are borage seedlings. As you can see, we have a lot of flowers here, and these plants are going to seed, but one of the downsides is they went to seed, and now they're spreading everywhere. And I mean everywhere. I mean literally everywhere. These seedlings are so fast growing. I mean, these just started sprouting about a week ago, and they're already this tall. These things are all over the place. And as you can see, they grow really quickly and they flower really quickly, and then that leads them to grow and grow rather out of control. And so we have this small issue here with the borage because we just let them go to flower and spread their seeds everywhere. But compare what you just saw, all of those plants, to what you're about to see right now. This is going to really change how you think about volunteers and just how easy they are to control and manipulate where they grow. This is dill. Now, dill, as I said, is one of the most notorious plants for spreading like a weed because it, in fact, is actually kind of a weed. Dill weed can spread everywhere. Each seed head produces hundreds and hundreds of seeds. So what we did is we actually, as it was flowering, selected a few to go to seed, a few that we wanted to be volunteers. And what we did is we actually took the seed heads, and we crumbled them once the seeds were ready over where we wanted the seeds. That actually caused the seeds to fall, nestle into the soil, and rather than blow around and spread around, they were very contained. We did that once the seeds were ready. We first had to come back and we had to cut the ones we did not want to go to seed, because had we let the 4 or 5 plants all go to seed, we would have had 2,000 to 3,000 dill plants in this space. So we cut those plants down. We actually cut those seed heads away so they could not spread. Then we let 1 plant go to seed. We took about 2 seed heads worth, and we took the seed heads and we just spread them, we just crumbled them over top of the soil. That's why you'll notice there's no volunteers here, because we have our peppers here. We didn't want competition for tall dillweed, and we didn't want a bunch of dillweed growing here. So we have a border here, and because we had our cucumbers and some more peppers here, we didn't want them spreading here. And you'll notice, look, not an ounce of dillweed here. So it's all concentrated exactly where we wanted it, and it's exactly where we took the seed heads and we just crumbled them. They're still volunteers. They all chose to grow or not to grow. I didn't care if they grew or didn't. They were there. If they grew, wonderful. If they didn't, no big deal. No harm done. And so these were volunteers. These voluntarily grew for me, but they're not a nuisance. They're not in the walkways. They're not competing with other plants. They're right where I want them. That is a great volunteer. Now here's another example. This was arugula. Now when the arugula went to seed, I did the exact same thing. I took the arugula flower. I took a couple, maybe 3 or 4 plants. I took all of the seed heads. I clipped them when they were dry and crumbly and brown, when they would normally be able to spread their seeds everywhere. Before they could do that, I took the seed heads, I took my hand, and I crumbled them over top of the surface, releasing the seeds where I wanted them. Once the seeds have been dispersed and they fall into the soil, they typically don't go very far. And so you might have a few plants that kind of get out and escape, but for the most part, as you'll see, no seedlings. Well, actually, yeah, just one little arugula seedling here, one little arugula seedling, but for the most part, very, very contained. This is exactly where I wanted them to be. I didn't want them over here. I didn't want them in my Swiss chard. I didn't want them in my kale. I wanted them right here. And that's exactly where they are. Check it out. Super, super contained. And I can come here and I can cut these microgreens and I don't have to worry about anything getting crazy and invasive. All right, so now I'm going to show you exactly what I did with this bee balm here. Now, bee balm spreads everywhere. It's a very notorious spreader, and I don't want it spreading all over the place, but these seed heads just started drying. The seeds inside are ready to be dispersed. The next strong wind we have, or the next time, something jostles these around, it's going to send seed kind of falling all over the place. So what I want to do is I want to get these seed heads cut down and spread where I want them. I could use a little bit more bee balm in this raised bed over here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take these. I'm going to be very careful not to shake them too much because I don't want the seed heads to, I don't want the seed to fall all over the place. So I'm going to be very careful, and I'm simply going to break the plant just like that. I have the seed heads ready right here, and I'm just going to take this seed head and I'm going to crumble them exactly where I want them. That way, the seed is falling right where I want the seed. It's not getting spread everywhere else. And then I can take the rest of these seed heads, I can cut them down, I can remove them from my garden, throw them in my compost pile, or burn them or take them to the trash just so that they don't spread seeds everywhere in my garden. Because these seed heads, there's probably 2,000 to 5,000 seeds on this one plant. There's a lot of seed heads, and each seed head has easily a couple hundred seeds. So they spread very, very easily. And from this head here, there's probably going to be 500 seeds or so. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put them there, and then we'll probably have to come back and thin once the plants start growing to maybe 2 or 3 plants that we want to keep. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take you over there and we're going to spread the seed. All right, so I have not done anything to the soil. I haven't flipped it, I haven't turned it, I haven't raked it, nothing. That's the point of a volunteer. Volunteers kind of just grow wherever they fall. So that makes it really nice. All I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take the seed heads and I'm simply going to crumble them. And I can see the seeds falling as we speak. I'm just going to sprinkle them over top of this area here. And then, like I said, in about 7 to 12 days, we're going to have a bunch of little bee balm seedlings sprouting up. So there you go. It is really that simple to control your volunteers. And now to a purist, I know you guys might not think that this is a volunteer, but for me, again, the plant is volunteering to grow there. I'm not picking the spacing, it's choosing that itself. And so to me, it's still a volunteer. It's just not a volunteer that grows everywhere. And I really like that because it gives you all of the benefits of a volunteer without some of the negatives that can come from volunteers. And so I hope you guys will give this a shot and let me know in the comments box below if you've tried this and your thoughts on it. I'm completely sold. And I think, for what it's worth and the benefits that it's given me, this is definitely going to be the way that I go about spreading volunteers from now on. I'm just completely sold. It's been such a nice experience. I have not had all of the negatives like what happened with my tomatoes and my borage and stuff. those have just been kind of a headache, to be honest. I've been constantly going back and having to pick those out so they don't overtake my garden. And so this is just really nice, super convenient, and super contained. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. Let me know in the comments box below if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. I'll catch you all on the next episode. All right, see ya. Bye.